Okay, we'll call this meeting of the Ethics and Election Committee together. It's about 8 minutes after noon on June 26, 2019. And let's start with some introductions. We'll have the Dean.
Consistent counseling.
Crystal Kennedy.
Forrest Dunbar.
Barbara Jones.
Sadie Edmondson.
Austin Quinn Davidson.
Dee Ennis.
Terry Kelly.
Patty Wellbanks. Interpreter.
And I'm Pete Peterson, Chair. And so I think Dee Ennis has got some information for us from the Board of Ethics. Go ahead,
Okay,
Dee.
go ahead. Two things the board wanted to bring to your attention. We'd like to put in a new code section on solicitation on behalf of the municipality. In other words, picnic favors, door prizes, that kind of thing. And also we wanted to do one amendment to the current gift section. I think that current amendment is easier than solicitation policy, so I thought I'd turn it over to Terry. And by the way, as you're looking at this code section, Terry, let me do my teeny history. We just rewrote this about 2 years ago. And what we tried to do is have a general rule sort of at the beginning that said that we want to avoid undue influence, appearance of any undue influence, We put a number of factors in C that sort of say, well, with these things we generally think will be okay. And then we switch, and then the school district, we have some different rules for them because they have a different giving system. What we found is when we first started, before we had done this rewrite, the ethics board was reviewing, 80% of its time was spent reviewing teacher gift disclosure forms. And then when we challenged any of them, they would, come in, we made somebody cry. I mean, it was really a very emotional issue. It was not a good thing. And so we said, well, let's try to establish some rules. And we have a great deal, by the way, of deference for the school district. However, there are other ways that they get exceptions. But one of the things we put in here was a reservation in paragraph F. And it says reservation for exceptions. It's on the second page. And that the board or municipal ethics officer may review and approve a gift which is consistent with the public policy concerns, underlying limitations on gifts. And so what we found happening was that people, let's say a teacher was getting a $100 gift, then they said, well, wait a minute, I want to go back to the board or the ethics officer and say, well, see, it really is okay, even though it falls clearly outside of these examples.
Thank you. No, I need the second page. Here it is. Here's a copy of the
Okay,
second page. Thank you.
So what was happening, we meant that sort of, as an ethics officer, I can be walking
The
down.
public doesn't have any copies
But
Right here, if you'd like one.
of anything here.
an agenda right there.
Do you need copies, Steve?
Apologies, the public.
Okay. At any rate, what was happening is our goal to initially not be spending 80% of our time as a board reviewing teacher gifts. And some of these gifts are sometimes very significant gifts, $150 spa, $1,000 airline passes. And so, and maybe Terry, I'm usurping your territory if you want to come on up here. What we found is that they would say, well, wait a minute, I got a $100 gift, but it was at the end of the semester, so it's above the $50 gift. But dear Ethics Board, it was the end of the semester, isn't that good enough? And so, but then we'd have to look into all sorts of things, like still do a full investigation, I don't mean the word investigation, but really look at it. Are there other kids in the family that are going to work for that teacher? Does that teacher coach other kids? So we got right back to where we started. And maybe I'll let you take it over. So our request probably to the board is at this point, we'd like to take F out, the reservations for exceptions, that the general rule and the sort of the safe harbors are there for everybody. And then to get a second shot at the ethics board. I mean, they can always come to the ethics board, but this really suggests to, especially the teachers, hey, I know you had a rule, $50, and I know if I donate bigger items, I can go through the PTA or through the principal. Again, we have a lot of stuff for the teachers that the average person doesn't get. But now I want a second exception, a second shot to really say, no, it really is fair that I get a $150 spa thing. So it became to the point that we realized that the exception was swallowing the rule, and we were right back to where we started. Because everybody always thinks it's fair to them to get outside of the sort of, and by the way, for those of you who are newer, the ethics board actually recommended to the assembly to have no small gift exception. Like right now, if a gift is worth $50 or less, you can do it, teachers alike. The ethics board actually wanted 0, and the assembly said, no, we want a small gift exception. So now here's a double end run around the small gift exception. And Terry was sort of the leader of the whole gift rewrite. I don't know if you have more stuff to add.
Well, you said you were going to start, and then I would take over, and then
But
you did everything.
I did
so
everything.
thank you.
And so.
It's an
go ahead
attorney,
and-
what can I say?
Go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm sorry.
Terry.
Oh, hi. Well, I'm Terry Kelly. I'm the current chair of the Board of Ethics, and I'm probably the longest-serving member of the board. So, yeah, Dee gave you a pretty good history. We mostly got turned on to this because several years ago we were getting gift disclosures from teachers for things like jewelry, hundreds of dollars in cash, airline gift vouchers and things like that, right? And so.
It's weird, no one ever gives us those things.
I never got those kind of
We
things
don't get
either,
anything.
right? And so, and as you can imagine, there's a variety of problems, right? I mean, and again, this is not to say that these are bribes, right? I mean, they're certainly not, in most cases, intended to be bribes. I doubt that they are, in most cases, sort of received as bribes, right? But of course, there's two problems. One, the literature on unconscious bias is pretty powerful and depressing, right? And the fact of the matter is, getting a gift from a student, particularly a large gift, say right before grades are due, we know the psychological literature shows that there is likely going to be an influence on the judgments, particularly gray area kind of judgments, right? So we're not talking about someone getting an A who should have gotten an F, but that gray area judgment about, is it a C or is it a B? You're right on that line, and if you've ever kind of taught, you often get in these kind of positions where you're kind of like right on the fence there. And then the second is the appearance, right? I mean, and so it's great that parents want to reward our great teachers, but not every parent can afford to do that, right? And so what is the effect on other parents and other students when some students are able to give hundreds of dollars in cash or diamond jewelry or airline vouchers, where other parents, the best that they can afford is maybe, like a $10 or $25 Kaladi card, right? Or a handwritten note from a student, right? Things like that, right? So we sort of went through this long process. Again, we looked at several school districts, like the Boston School District, which has zeroed out. So it's a zero monetary value policy. So what are we talking about? We're talking about end of the year, students are writing handwritten notes or making little projects for their teachers. Which, by the way, many teachers tell me those are the gifts that they actually remember, or the little the kind of like hand-produced, handcrafted student things. They actually put time into, right? Because after all, mom and dad hands them $200. That's great. But the student didn't necessarily have any sort of initiative into putting that in. So the assembly adopted the $50 limit instead of the $0 limit. Fair enough. But yeah, as Dee said, we put this exception because we thought there might be these very unique circumstances where perhaps a gift would be otherwise acceptable. Maybe very end of the year, students graduating, right? But of course, what we wound up with is we're right back, not right back, but we're slowly going back to where we started, namely reviewing more and more gift disclosures when we really shouldn't have to. It'd be better for the Board of Ethics to be spending its time doing advisory opinions and its educational mission and things like that, instead of reviewing these requests for unique exceptions. And most of these requests for unique exceptions are not unique exceptions. They fall very clearly within the general rule and the policies that we've laid out. And so we'd like to take F out because we're not actually finding gifts that are these other, these sort of like black swan type gifts that are somehow threading the needle and are acceptable. We're not finding that. And instead what we're finding is more and more teachers are looking for that exception when it's not really there.
That's the question.
Austin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you said that this takes up the bulk of your review, of the teacher type gifts takes up the bulk. How common is that, and how will they react to this? And are teachers sort of expecting gifts, or what's the culture around that?
Well, we have a strong gift-giving culture. In part, there's a strong gift-giving culture for, primary and secondary schools anyway, right? I mean, parents, you know, as one former Board of Ethics, you know, board member put it, is like, I don't know, when the city, you know, when the city meter reader comes by, no one's giving them money, right? It's like, oh, wow, thanks for cleaning the sewer out. Here's $200 and a diamond ring, right? But something special about our teachers, right? I mean, like, we trust our kids to them, and so we have a strong culture, and then of course there's a variety of cultures in Anchorage that have very strong gift-giving aspects to the culture, right? Where that is, you know, even lavish gifts are not seen, or just seen as basic tokens of respect, right? So teachers, you know, and that's why it was a hard road to go getting these policies passed, because we do have a strong culture where teachers at the holidays and then at the end of the year, they're expecting gifts. I mean, not in the sense that they're wanting them, but in the sense that they know that those are the times of the year where they're going to be getting a lot of gifts from parents. We've had these rules in place now for a couple of years, so I think taking the reservation out, I don't think is going to register significantly with teachers. We've had these rules. It was putting these rules in place. That's what sort of was the sort of big wave that we had to go through.
Okay.
But now we have new forms for teachers to go through, and so the policies that we have now I think are pretty well known. We work pretty closely with the school district to try to get the word out to teachers and parents about the new policy. It's just that, and it worked. I mean, for a while, the board was not really dealing with many of these disclosures because it was really obvious whether it's in or out. It's $50, and that's pretty much it. What we're finding is creep, right? We're getting more and more and more of these requests for exceptions.
Could I have 2 points, if
Do
you
you-
don't mind? To the chair. Are you the chair?
Yes.
Two things. One is when teachers come to us with this, we want an exception, and then when we say no, they're very insulted. Because we've now said, not only do you not fall within the rules, now we think you're outside of the ethics rules. So it's actually backfired, because they're like, well, wait a minute, you said I could go back to the board and make sure. So I think it's actually backfired, is number one. But number two is, we put in all these rules you see at D for school, and that was after meeting with the school board half a dozen times, including Cameron was on that at the time, and really trying to accommodate a lot of their mechanisms for gifts. You know, they can parents can give stuff to the PTAs and through the principals, and, you know, educational supplies discounts or tickets for trips where the employee serves as a mentor or chaperone. We really tailored this to teachers to accommodate them because they have a different system versus pure cash gifts or spa gifts. So, but anyway, this has backfired, this reservation.
And again, it's backfired in a second way, that when these teachers ask for this exception, well, the exception gets reviewed at the next Board of Ethics meeting, right? And so in some of these cases, the teacher has kept the gift.
Right.
And instead of what would have been more appropriate is that, okay, this is outside the policy, and as awkward as it may be, I need to return this. I say, hey, thank you, but I can't take a direct
Right.
gift for a $200 Visa check card, you know, from you. Instead, they're keeping it. In most cases, fortunately, not using it, but they're keeping it, and then they're asking for this exception. Well, now it's 2 months later or a month later. Now we're having problems of, well, what happens? The student's gone. Maybe the student's graduated. Where does the gift go now? So where it just would have been easier to say, look, there aren't exceptions. If it's outside the policy, you need to return the gift.
Well, so the parent, grandparent, whoever could give the gift to the PTA, and then they funnel it to the teacher, and so is that a way for them to get around the rule in any way, or?
Well, they could give it to you. I mean, so if, you know, a lot of parents say, well, I want to give money because I know teachers are spending their own money, for instance, on like school supplies, office classroom supplies, right?
Okay.
Yeah, and so one way that you can get around that, you know, or maybe one way in which you can further that idea while remaining consistent with both the spirit and the letter of the policy is by, giving it to the PTA, and the PTA collects that fund and then uses that fund for classroom supplies throughout the school. You know, and you certainly could tell the teacher, I suppose, that I've done that, right? I gave to the PTA. But the main idea is that what we don't want is that sort of like direct exchange in which the parent's directly giving money to the teacher. Again, even if it's for a noble reason, again, we know the potential influence on teachers is pretty well established. And again, I mean, there's a variety of ways that parents, want to, reward and give gifts to teachers. They can give to the PTA if they're concerned about teachers using their own money or not having sufficient office supplies. They can give gifts anonymously, right? I mean, so there's a variety of ways in which they can do it that don't have to require that face-to-face, oh, here's my gift to you.
Gosh, you know, my sister was elementary school teacher in the school district for 20 years, and she was lucky to get a Hardy hand clasp. I don't remember her ever telling me that she had gotten some monetary gift or a diamond. You got to be kidding me.
She's probably got a pension now, so that's nice.
Well, yeah, but 20 years, she earned it.
Maybe.
Right. Yeah.
Back then.
Yeah, so I'm saying back then
Exactly.
back then you got a defined benefit pension. Now we give you a 401k and a smile.
Can I ask another question, Mr. Chair? Unless were you going to ask something for us?
Well, Ms. Jones had brought up the fact that.
Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. That the last sentence in F might be worth holding on to in some way. If someone does find themselves with the, and I get it, you wouldn't be doing these reviews, but if someone got a gift and then later on realized it violated the ethics rules, does it say elsewhere in the reg that they can give it back or give it to charitable organizations?
They don't. Sorry, can I respond? They don't. It doesn't say elsewhere. I, as an ethics officer, liked this last line because I run into people and they say, I just got a $100 bottle of scotch, what can I do with it? So it's much easier for me to be able to redirect quickly and efficiently, but maybe what the difference is for us is we don't call that exceptions. It's simply redirection.
Yeah.
What sort of charitable organization accepts the scotch?
We won't talk about that incident any longer.
Say like the Dick
Well,
Tracy Foundation.
Well, the Board of Ethics, right? Are we a charitable organization?
But anyway, the redirection is
Actually, he
helpful.
doesn't drink. I'm talking about.
Or that,
I thought that's why you said it.
we have, with effect, a couple of the teachers, well, I guess it redirected it to the principal. There was also a sort of philosophical debate at the ethics board, should they just have to give it back to the donor, or can we say, you can't accept that, you just redirect it to your principal?
So wait, the principal got the scotch? That's what you're saying?
It's nice to be the principal.
We all know
Dee's
who got the
wishing she would've brought
scotch.
that one up.
That's
No, I
fine.
knew that was a good one.
Wait, so
Oh, go ahead.
where could we put that then? If we're going to delete F.
Well, maybe
Or
we
maybe
say,
you all can find a place to put it in.
yeah, something, I mean, I'd like to just call it redirection, so maybe we just bring it back to the ethics board and say that the assembly questioned that as well, whether, how do we want to deal with the redirection provision, but not call it exceptions.
Quick question.
Austin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Who else gets gifts like this? Is it mostly all teachers, or are there other populations? I'm just sort of curious.
Okay.
Oh, do you?
I was just saying, those are the ones that came to our attention.
Okay.
Because they filed disclosure forms, and because it hit the newspaper quite a few times with some of these larger gifts.
People get gifts in the office, like when they're retiring, things
Right.
like that, right? Holidays, there's gifts. The last, the deputy clerk that was working with us, I gave her a bottle of wine each time with a little note. This bottle is less than $50. So immediately for ceremonial purposes, it's a. And then sometimes the mayor, right? The mayor sometimes gets diplomatic gifts, right? When
Yeah.
there's
Makes sense.
when there's exchange and stuff like that, and they all have to be reviewed. Sometimes we have things in here about tickets and stuff like that. That was the other thing that we had a big brouhaha about was elected officials getting tickets to attend various events, and does that create influence or the appearance of influence, things like that. But and those are really interesting and important. It was, the reason why we wound up having to deal with the teacher one, again, as Dee suggested, is particularly around the holidays and at the end of the year, hundreds and hundreds of
Okay.
gift disclosures, and it was
Wow.
it was monopolizing the board's time at a certain point. And then most of them now still fall within the policy, and you don't even have to worry about them. And again, we were getting, not only so it was both time consuming, but then we were getting drip, 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 these steady drips of disclosures that were really eye-opening, like, wow, I can't believe someone gave a teacher $300-400 or an airline voucher. And then, as Dee said, when we would, with the ones that were completely over the top, at least in the board's mind, we would bring the teacher in, and it would often be a very tense exchange, right? Which is no good. That's not good for anyone.
Yeah.
It was what I think this is the first and only gift I've ever gotten in my 20 years as a teacher, and now you're going to take it away from me, and just tears, and we're like, "Ugh."
Well, actually, what she said was, and I think this, this again, I'm not this, it's like, she said, you know, you can't, this is like completely okay, that this gift is the nicest thing that anyone's ever done for me.
Oh my God.
Right? But, and I said like,
That's the
but you
problem.
can see that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
That's the problem. I'm
Right.
like, given that that's your attitude about this gift that you received,
Yeah.
how on earth can you really be now objective about this particular student, or when you get their siblings, or if you're asked later to write a letter of recommendation or reference for them, when you feel, oh, this person's done the nicest thing for me.
Well, so, but if a teacher, you know, retired and they gave them a gift, you know, after, you know, they retired a month or two, would this, I mean, they wouldn't be an employee any longer, so would that technically be kosher, or?
I think you'd be okay. You wouldn't be
We
subject to
have
the
sort of a
code.
special one on C1, an item given for special occasion by municipal coworkers.
Yeah.
That's by municipal code.
Yeah.
Well, that's true.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
We wanted to maybe expand that, but that was sort of the intent on that kind of a rule, weddings, and, but you're right, it would extend also to parents.
Mr. Dunbar?
The military, I don't know if you looked into this, the military has like a very elaborate system for when you, because these kind of like retirement or going away or change of command parties happen all the time, and so there are special rules, like you can only ask an enlisted member for $10, and like it's very specific. Yeah, I think it's very interesting giving culture. So I was going to actually ask you about that, if you had some special exceptions for retirements, and it seems like you sort of do, but I think Pete has identified the best way to get around it. It's just retire first and then have your party.
Yeah.
Yeah, then you can get all the diamond rings.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so the diamond ring thing was just happened too early. Timing.
like-
You wait 15 more years. and then
Hold
you
on
can-
to it.
Yeah.
Ms. Jones?
Mr. Chair, I'll let you know I can echo a couple of the things that Dr. Kelly and Deanna have said. Lately, the clerk's office has been dealing with an incredible number of phone calls from teachers saying, "Where's the gift disclosure form?" There is no gift disclosure form because either it's acceptable or it's not acceptable, but they're still looking for the form, or they find the
Interesting.
old form and use the old form trying to get approval. I think the second problem that we have is, I'd argue that it's probably not sufficiently well disseminated at the school district, and the old form actually has a provision for the ASD ethics officer to have reviewed, and I'm sure you're going to come up with that again, and that is not happening. And if the ASD ethics officer was getting involved with these gifts sooner, they would never be coming to the board and they would be resolved. And so I think that's a separate issue that ASD needs to get an ethics officer on board, get an ethics officer up to speed so that the clerk's office and you guys aren't dealing with these.
So do we know if they still have an ethics officer over there at the ASD?
So it was Todd Hess was sort of saying, no, I'm that person. And it would probably be more helpful if they would use our ASD school influence here to get them to identify some person.
So, I mean,
Because we could train that person.
what about putting that ethics officer as a member of the Board of Ethics? Was that, I mean, has that been done in the past, or what do you think about that idea?
I don't have a problem with that. I think it would be a lot of time for that person that was not really directly relevant to the school experience, unless you had a school issue. Now, we have called the school different, the purchasing officer or this person, that, when we get complaints. We get a lot of complaints about the school district that filter into the ethics board, and then we will ask people at the school district. So the school district has been pretty involved with some ethics issues. But it would be helpful to still have one person, whether, again, they want to do that type of time consumption of the ethics board.
Well, I know when I was in the legislature, there was a lot of controversy about gifts being given, and so they were constantly trying to wrestle with what was going to be allowable, or, not allowable and amending this and amending that. I actually thought it was kind of funny because nobody even bought me a hot dog bill when I was in there, so. But, you know, I guess it depends on what committee you were the chair of or something, you know. And,
Well, that's good.
Ms. Ennis?
I was gonna say, one of these new rules have really helped my job as the ethics officer, because I used to just get 10 calls a week, and many of them were in areas like the tickets for the elected officials, or the police chief has been invited to go speak at a wake. And so those, we've really addressed those and said, okay, here's your general rule. And it's really, it's dramatic decrease in time. And people deserve rules, I mean, they deserve guidelines. So that has really made a difference. When we identify an area that's taking a lot of unnecessary time, then that's the time for a code change.
Okay. Any other questions from committee members or comments?
Mr. Chair, does the committee want to see a drafted code change brought back before it? And then I'm sure that the board would ask the committee to sponsor that code change. Would you like to see that next month?
Yeah, a suggestion would be great. You know, and like someone mentioned, maybe leave that last sentence of F in and try to figure out
Find a
where
new home for it.
that would fit in the code, or where to keep it in the best spot. Mr. Gates?
I think that last sentence of F would fit at the end of B right now. You know, it's part of the general rule.
And
Just
B,
That's what I was thinking too.
True.
Man.
so it's a general rule, okay.
At F reserved and B.
Any comments from committee members about putting that at the end of B? Seeing none, it looks like maybe that might be the place to try to put it first and see if that works out.
I'd say just tell us.
Well, one of my questions there is gifts may be redirected by whom? By the recipient, by the ethics board, so you get a $1,000 gift and you redirect it to your buddy. But we might want to spend a few more minutes, whether it's at the end of B, just clarifying what that really means.
Yeah.
Okay,
I like that rule.
that makes sense.
I got the Scotch next, so.
It should be redirected to the city's ethics officer.
It would be a fun Board of Ethics meeting, bring that bottle of scotch, we have an example here.
Or have our own auction and start raising some
There you go.
money.
That's true, new revenue.
Yeah, every little bit counts. Okay, any,
So can I suggest that, let's bring it back to the ethics board one time. We'll come back with a draft, and then at that same time, what I can do is draft an AM and an AO for you. Make sure that AM reflects this group as well.
and so when's the next Board of Ethics meeting? What's the time?
Like in between this one and your next one, so
Oh,
like
okay.
2 weeks, so it'd be perfect timing.
All right, great.
I do have a
Okay.
question just in regard to Ms. Jones' comment about the fact that there is no ethics form. Is that something that could be included here to say that there's no need to fill out any kind of a form, just so people know that? Like you said, the point is you either qualify or you don't. And is there something maybe that says a gift either qualifies under this ordinance or it doesn't?
I have to say, I
Sense.
think that's a good idea, because the past ethics code had 15 types of disclosures at different amounts. And those of us who knew that system are always saying, where's my disclosure form?
Mhm.
And so I think that's a good idea, and it probably would be its own section, like right past B, or, so I personally think that's a great idea.
There's no need for a form, it just either complies or it doesn't.
Mhm.
Right, so
Okay.
the question that I have though is, they might not know exactly what the value of the item that they were given is. You know, if it's something homemade, what value would you put on that?
Nothing.
Something
Yeah.
that's homemade has no value?
Mhm.
Really?
We don't require, there's a homemade thing, and we don't require a value for it.
Huh?
Okay, yeah, can I,
Ms. Kennedy?
okay, yes, because I have seen some artwork pieces that have been done, like for teacher retirement, I think, a big quilt where everybody had kind of a part to putting that together, and obviously there was materials purchased in that for that, and you could certainly say there was value to that workmanship, but you're saying, no, it's considered homemade, so there's no value.
Right. And
So unless it's actually purchased retail somewhere, then,
well, the board discussed that a lot, and their theory was that they really wanted to encourage that type of gift giving. And it also was consistent with cultural norms, and so we didn't want to get around to a whole bunch of rules. So it simply says an item homemade or handmade, crafted by the giver.
I tell you what, though, if somebody carves me one of those nice wooden bowls,
I'm
their
thinking
their
that
kid's
too.
getting an A.
Nice sealskin gloves, yeah.
Except for Forrest. Exception. And if the committee has other thoughts about that, but we finally decided it was probably more difficult than it was worth. The last code really suffered from having different amounts for different gifts, like $250 for this, or if the plaque was worth $150, or it was just, you couldn't figure out any of it. Versus a simple, $50, and then you fit within a couple categories. By the way, there is a general rule.
Play on one of those chessboards that has
Yeah.
the different layers or whatever,
And there is a general rule, to avoid undue influence, that theoretically, if you're doing that right before some
If you
event
do
that affects your, like you're gonna get a permit or something, that still can fall under that general rule.
Yeah, I see number 5 now.
But I could see where some teachers say, well, how dare you say that this is gonna influence my grade on that kid?
Sure.
And so I could see why some people might be offended that you would even consider that would influence them.
No, I had my ear chewed off more than once.
I bet you have.
Several people at ASD. It's like, how dare you say these are bribes? And it's. But again, the psychological literature is pretty clear on that. And we can also get common sense too, right? I mean, and not to go on a philosophical
Here we
side,
go.
but in Western cultures we actually really don't have a gift culture, right? I mean, we have an exchange culture, right? So when you receive a gift, the expectation is that there's going to be an exchange. It's called the reciprocity effect, and in our culture, minimally, we do that symbolically by saying thank you. Right? So in this culture, to receive a gift and not even acknowledge that you've received the gift is insulting, right? But that's not true in all cultures. In pure gift-giving cultures, gifts are given with truly no strings attached, right? And this is why it was the source of all sorts of problems, right? It's sort of like Western explorers / colonizers were going to different countries. They were giving these gifts, and then people just take the gifts and walk away. They're like, those ungrateful little, it's like, well, no, in this culture, it would actually spoil the gift. If you think about it, it does. It spoils a gift to return something, even in the acknowledgement of a thank you. You've no longer made it a gift, you've made it an exchange. It's a nice exchange because I'm getting something really, I'm getting sealskin gloves, and all you're getting is a thank you. But we really do have this strong reciprocity effect in Western cultures. When you get a gift, there is a cultural expectation and an unconscious mechanism that, kind of propels us to giving something back.
Yeah, I remember reading in the newspaper, people are writing to people in there complaining about, oh yeah, I sent so-and-so a birthday gift or a wedding gift and never even got a thank you, and I'm not sending them Christmas cards anymore or whatever, and so, yeah, I understand where you're coming from, Ms. Kennedy.
But I think some of that happens maybe as we develop and get older, turn into adults. But I think with children, I don't think that's true. And I know when I think of my 3 kids, I have 2 sons and a daughter, and the sons could probably care less about whether or not the teacher got a gift at the end of the year or for Christmas or whatever. But my daughter, that was a big deal, So that was just part of either who she is or anyway, it was important to her. And so I could see where with children, if that's where the rationale comes from behind that idea of giving that gift, I can see where it is a whole lot more. It's not a reciprocity kind of thing. It's just a whole lot more genuine about that child wanting to give their teacher, whoever that is, some token of appreciation or because they have a relationship. I mean, that's the difference between the meter reader and the teacher. You know, there's definitely, and in some cases, incredibly strong relationships with those children and their teacher. So anyway, I can see if it's from a parent's motivation where it gets a whole lot more skewed, but I think with children it's a whole lot more genuine, and that's where probably more of the conflict comes in, where a teacher's just, or a parent's just trying to do what their child wants. I want to give Mrs. Smith this, you know, whatever.
But,
So it gets,
but thank you, Mr. Chair, but in that case, they could do a under $50 gift.
True.
Still. Just
Right.
maybe there's something you want that, and along the lines of your tangent, I was just texting a friend yesterday, and I had left a gift on his porch like 3 weeks ago, and he had never texted me to say he received it. And so we're texting about something else, but I had left it, you know, just sitting in the open. So I thought, did someone take it? Because I never heard
Surely
thank
you
you.
would have said
and
thank you,
surely
right.
he would have said thank you. But I didn't want to ask him because I felt like then it would be like, shouldn't you be thanking me? And sure enough, he had received it and forgot to thank me and then apologized. I thought, oh, I've totally ruined this gift because now it's, you know. So anyway, there's a lot of psychological things about expecting something in return, even if it's just a thank you.
We should all give fewer gifts. Go take
Clearly
care.
the solution,
Yeah,
yeah.
give fewer gifts or give true gifts, right? Where you just like, no
You don't
strings
expect
attached, here it
anything.
is. Which is hard to do. I mean,
But
like,
because
George
there's
Costanza,
that
it never
cultural thing,
ends.
you expect someone to say thank you.
Oh my God,
Even
wait,
like,
wait.
you think maybe they didn't get it. I mean, I really was
Yeah,
like, oh, I
oh,
left
no,
it
I
on
would
his
do
porch.
that
Did
too.
someone snag it? I don't know. You
Especially
know.
these days.
I was raised in a non-gift
Go
culture.
on,
I
stealing
mean,
out of Target.
Unless it was Christmas or your birthday, you know, you just didn't expect anything from anyone, you know, and
It's
therefore,
Kunolam.
Yeah, what is?
I find it a difficult time giving someone else
Yeah.
a gift because I actually don't think about it most of the time. So unless it's Christmas, you know, and even their birthday, I probably forget about their birthday. So, and I guess it depends on what the.
Oh, yeah.
I get
From a
expecting
gift.
this gift.
Well, that's right. I mean, think about our kids. I mean, how many times have you had to tell your kids, say thank you?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, like my
Right.
little was like 2,
Yeah.
3, he would just take the gift. Wow, great, and just walk away and stop, go back,
Yeah.
thank you, right? You know.
Yeah, that's
so
part
in some
of
sense,
it.
we actually, you know, then we socialize that into them.
Okay, I have to encourage this group to move on to the.
Sorry.
Not just
Okay.
Lots of this is fascinating. Many
Every
conversations.
time, no tangents.
All right, so
That's an interesting question. Who's it for?
new ethics code on MOA solicitation is the next item.
Question
Let's
who
go to
it
that.
for
Do
is
you
not
have
really discussed.
information
If
to
you could,
provide?
yeah, let me give you some background on
Humanity.
this real quick. Right now, we have no solicitation policy, and this is about getting gifts from third parties. So for instance, examples of this, the Employee Incentive Committee wants to go to Costco and get free hot dogs, or GCI, which by the way is one of our major contractors, wants to provide all the blank for that picnic. Can Alaska Airlines give us door prizes? They're not a contractor with us currently. They have a whole department set up for gift, giving them, they give all sorts of stuff away. GCI, at the end of the year, wants to give a party for all the people who have worked on their projects. We have millions of dollars of projects with GCI. Is that appropriate? And so we wanted to get some type of policy together. I wanted it to be citywide. The administration was also interested in this. And I said, let's make it citywide because it also applies to the assembly. And when can we when can we actually go to and or accept stuff from third parties? And so and there are different considerations. We did meet with Ron Haddon of the purchasing department, excuse me. We looked at very elaborate codes that really try to spell this out. So for instance, GCI, well, they could do a year-end party if they weren't, or could they? You know, here are some of the factors. Could they do it if they weren't, or if there were no bid awards pending? Well, yeah, but they have an awful lot of influence. But isn't it nice for GCI to give a party for all the employees, or at least project managers and their families, on top of a roof and celebrate all their working together, almost like a networking thing? So yeah, but we give them a lot of money, and so that one, by the way, as an ethics officer, I said no to. I said no. Until we have a policy, that doesn't sound right, or we need a policy, or I would bring that to the ethics board, and certain people would have persuaded the ethics board not to do it. But for instance, getting hot dogs from Costco, we don't have business relationships with Costco. Costco. So anyway, so this is an attempt to address that issue, and more, you know, there are collaborative efforts between the municipality and its, quote, business partners. And shouldn't there be? Are we really that just because we have a contract with someone, they can never do something nice for us or any of our citizens and so this is what it ended up being. And again, it would start out simple, became very complex, and then it came back to here. So a public servant is employees, elected officials, so everybody. May solicit donations on behalf of the municipality, except when the timely nature or other circumstances of the donation would cause a reasonable person. And again, so there's your general rule. So if there is a big issue, you know, a box store is trying to get a permit or something big, then yeah, no, we don't go to that box store to get food for our picnic. So that's always an underlying rule. And by the way, let me skip to the very bottom. This next to the bottom, all solicitations are subject to the approval of the ethics officer, board of ethics, or both. In other words, this isn't something you just do. This does need a second layer of review, is what people thought.
So can I ask a
Go ahead.
question? So it seems like a lot of the work and concern here revolves around the words "on behalf of the municipality," right? Because most of us, when we're doing those kind of solicitations, it's on behalf of some other third party. Like for me, it's the Muldoon Farmers Market or the Spirit of Muldoon Picnic or something like that. And if we decided sort of that is not subject to this and is not subject to the ethics code, is that the current practice? So like the police might not come and say GCI or whoever throw us a party, but they might say, hey, we've got this nonprofit we like to partner with, let's say United Way, we'd like you to donate to them. Is that
Well, that's
considered?
interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
Is that considered outside the ethics code at this point? I kind of think it should be because it's extremely difficult to monitor, but I would guess that most of us, I think probably all of us, do at least some kind of, like I fundraise for the Parks Foundation, for example.
Okay, so you don't do it on behalf of the assembly. I mean, I still think that you have,
Right.
if it's personal.
He does. Remember, he can use his title as assembly member in any work that he does.
But versus fundraising.
And fundraising for the Parks Foundation, he's on the board, so yes, he is Assembly Member Dunbar.
Yeah, although I don't.
But you're not fundraising on behalf of the assembly, right?
Well, so that's
Right.
that's the thing. When you say on
Uh-huh.
behalf of, what you're saying is the funds or the in-kind donations are going to the municipality or one of our entities, right?
And can I say first, I like your example about APD, that APD wants to support Awake.
Yep.
And can they say, we're gonna go here and get money and fundraise for that? You know, we already have, I don't know, we do have mayoral policies on fundraising, but
Multiple dystrophy.
I was gonna say,
Right,
how's it work with the
fill the boot.
firefighters?
Yep, fill the boot.
Well, there's a.
that's actually been pretty well regulated, I would say.
But wasn't that issue because they were on their own time or something, or it had to do with
They
their?
used equipment,
Yeah.
uni equipment.
But Mr. Gates?
Could you resolve that if you just add behalf of the municipality or third party? Because I think the main considerations are whether the solicitation is improper, the factors 1, 2, and 3, regardless if it's on behalf of the municipality or on behalf of Awake or some other third party organization.
But you don't want to
You just
include
add
that.
the phrase or
No.
third party.
Well, no. I'm pointing out.
Sorry.
I'm pointing out that the fundraising on behalf of Awake is not currently covered, and I don't necessarily want it to be, because I think it will lead to a lot of complications.
Yeah.
And we might decide that it does become too problematic, but I kind of like the fact, I just wanted to make sure we're all acknowledging the fact that you've cabined this regulation in such a way that it's not going to apply in a lot of cases, right? Because I don't fundraise on behalf of the Assembly. The Assembly,
Right, no.
whatever. I fundraise on
And
behalf
so
of the Northeast
when
Community
you drew
Council.
this up, it was done to try to allow fundraising for third parties like
I think we didn't consider
MD
it.
or.
Could, oh, sorry,
Ms.
Mr.
Van
Chair.
Davidson.
Couldn't you just say something like that would benefit the municipality, or that would go to the municipality, or something more clear about what on
Mhm.
behalf means? Because I agree, I don't think I want to include, I just agree.
I mean, do we not want to include it at all? I mean, so the police want to raise funds for Awake, and so they go to, an entity that does a lot of work with the police and says, hey, we're going to be reviewing a whole lot of work for you coming up.
Yep.
By the way, we're also raising funds for Awake.
Yep.
Right.
Ms. Jones?
Now they're what's different. They're in their official capacity, and they're using their official capacity to apply pressure on this entity to donate, right? So it's a solicitation, not necessarily for the city, but what triggers my concern at any rate is that they're acting and they're using their official capacity, which I don't think you're doing in the, I mean, unless you keep saying, you know, as member of the assembly, I think that would be, it's one thing to have your title, it's another thing to start, and we made this clear a couple times when we talked about, like, you know, campaign calls and things like that. It's one thing to have your title, you have your title, it's who you are. It's another thing to start using it and trading on its symbolic power, and saying, you know, as a member of the assembly, and start, like, you know, intimating that you are acting in your official capacity. The more you're acting in your official capacity, the more you should be covered by the ethics code.
Ms. Jones?
I guess the first thought that I had when I read it, and Dee said that the assembly members were covered, I wonder if maybe they shouldn't be, because I think that the police officer example, whether it's for the municipality or Awake, there could be an opportunity for the police officer to be unduly influenced. So I'm agreeing with your example. But I think that the assembly is so different. They are not, they have a totally different job. That is their job, to be out there talking to people and influencing them and being influenced. So I just wonder if maybe they shouldn't even be included.
You
Mr. Dunbar?
know, a former mayor once told me a story, and I guess everybody can infer who this is, where he, like, went to a very powerful family and said, "We will name this park after you if you donate X million dollars to help us rebuild this park." Would that have violated this? And by the way, Anchorage got a park out of it,
Yeah.
and it's now named after that family.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Which park is it?
well, I'm not going
I know.
to infer from context. But I mean, the point is, I mean, I guess it wasn't violating anything at the time, but that is what elected officials do, right? So, I don't know. Was that unethical? The family got to name a park, and we got a park out of it.
Well, I guess it would be, that's actually a good question. I mean, what's missing in that one, what's most concerned the board was the kind of coercive element, right? So a lot of times when we're soliciting, let's say soliciting someone who has a contract with the city,
Yeah.
right? Is there sort of something hanging over their head such that, is there an implicit or sometimes explicit sort of, if you don't give us the free hot dogs or whatever it is, something might happen to your contract,
Yeah.
right? When you're asking the family to give for the park, it doesn't seem it's coercive in that,
Sure.
in that kind of way.
But I mean, it seems like the more common practice and what you're trying to avoid is more like bribery, where they say, "We have this contract, here's a bunch of hot dogs, or something much more valuable, keep this contract." I mean, us going out and soliciting that stuff, I think, is relatively less common. Maybe I'm perceiving that wrong.
But there was a way to get around that. They could have gone to the family and asked for the donation and said, after the park is open, then the assembly in 3 or 4 or 5 months will put a committee together to decide who we're going to name that park after, and we're going to suggest that we name it after your relative.
Sure.
So, I mean,
Well, that might be what they said, but
That's
it's the
probably what they
same.
did, yeah.
It's the same idea, I guess.
so I mean, it's using more than.
I mean, I guess
skin
my
a cat, as they used to say.
my first impression of this is that this is fine. You know what I mean? And this is kind of what you're getting at, right? You started simple, got very complicated, and then it got simple again. And that is generally the case in the law, right? We can probably come up with a bunch of Stephen Breyer-esque ridiculous examples to blow a hole in this rule, but like this is fine to me, I think.
Well, when we
most
redrew the
cases.
ethics code, we were trying to reduce pages. That what Mr. Trainee was saying, this thing is too long, it's too complicated, we need to cut it down, and make it simpler to understand, and I probably did. I mean, I believe we did. Dee?
What I was gonna say in response first to what you're saying, and Barbara, is if we didn't have the assembly in here, I'm not sure that's not a bad idea. We already have a PMP, administration PMP that actually does tell employees when they can use city time to fundraise or charitable, and it's very prescribed, and maybe I'll just bring that in next time, or send it all to you for educational purposes. And it was put in at the time of the Fill the Boot controversy. And so it actually, needs to be reworked a little bit because it was sort of thrown in fairly quickly and borrowed from another jurisdiction. But maybe, and if that was so, then I would just say that we do just keep it as an employee policy. But I think what the administration, or what I suggested to the administration, is they were constantly coming to me from municipal manager on down, Dee, can we do this? Can we do this? And I said, it'd be nice to have some type of rules. And if we decide after this committee that, well, geez, maybe that is a municipal function, whether the administrative part, the purchasing part, the employee incentive committee part, they develop their own rules, which would be this added to the other policy probably, for when that is appropriate. Right now, a lot of that doesn't get done because they say we don't think we can do this, or like me saying no to GCI.
Ms. Kennedy?
Are there any issues, I guess I'm looking at just the term public servant, and why that was chosen over employee.
In the code, because it was meant to be all-inclusive, in the code, public servant includes employees, elected officials, and board and commission members.
And board and commission,
Yeah,
okay.
so it's your
okay.
all-inclusive one.
Yeah, then that really gets convoluted if you're talking commissions and anyway.
Yeah. So I think for now, at least, you should keep it limited to donations to the municipality, although I agree that there are cases where it probably would look a little improper. But again, this is the mayor and the assembly does this all the time. We go to CHA, or we go to the Mental Health Trust Authority and like, hey, could you help fund this program? Like, is that a donation or is that a grant? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
or
no, that's interesting,
like,
'cause
hey, could you
we were
Providence
really
Hospital?
thinking hot dogs.
Yeah, Providence Hospital. Could you partner with us to give $1 million to where was it? The Children's Covenant House, right? They just made that donation. Like, I don't know what role the mayor played in that, but it clearly dovetails with the agenda of what we've been trying to do. You know, and we constantly are asking nonprofits and foundations to help us, or wealthy donors to help us. John Rubini, was he the person that rebuilt the dome? You know, I mean, I know that people asked him, basically, people went to him hat in hand and asked someone to rebuild the dome after it collapsed because we couldn't afford to do
The
it.
community doesn't own the dome.
Well, that's my point. It is, but even if we had, I mean, isn't that sort of a different kind of thing? I mean, and I guess what you're saying is it doesn't have the appearance of impropriety. We weren't, right? A reasonable person wouldn't have thought we're going to give him a good deal if he helps us rebuild this thing.
That's right. I mean, like it would depend on what they had coming up, say, to the assembly, right? So let's say you ask this wealthy donor to fix the dome. In the meantime, there's something coming up to the assembly that has direct relationship with their business.
Right.
Right. Then I think the public will say, yeah, we got a dome, but now we have a corrupt government. And that's the way, I mean, like for every new park, you know, there's an equally nasty corruption story, right? In which sort of like, you know, you ask people, oh, hey, we'll name this after you, you know, or you donate to this, and then we'll vote in favor of, you know, your business plan, or we, you know, or we'll have, you know, your taxes reviewed in a certain way, or your property reviewed in a certain way. That's sort of the concern. That you're right. It's the, as you say, it's the things that start looking like bribery is the concern.
Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, because I guess maybe I am making it too convoluted too, or too many what
We
ifs.
did the same thing.
But yeah, and of course, eventually you'll get the what if, right? But I guess I'm even thinking about this, you know, just in terms of politically. I mean, because any one of us can go say, okay, let's get $50,000 from whatever organization to help support this, and then 2 years later you run for re-election, you go, oh, by the way, I was the one that got this $50,000, you know, and then it becomes, you know, a political feather in my cap, you know, kind of a thing. So I can see where maybe, you know, I don't know if you're even talking about that kind of an influence, but
Well, we
it's
have to
certainly-
go. Yeah, I mean, in her example, we have to go and get approval from D to do that. I mean, it says all solicitations are subject
well-
to your approval.
Or the board. Can I point out one thing for
Yeah,
Is it-
play with
Crystal?
that
Is
one a
that
bit.
E on the gift thing says a campaign contribution to an elected official or candidate from municipal office, which is reported, blah, 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 is not considered a gift. So we took that one out.
Right,
Yeah,
but it
but that's
wouldn't be a
different.
contribution to me, it would just be, like I said, kind of a feather in my
Long run.
cap in terms
Okay.
of saying, hey, I did this for my community. So
Yeah.
obviously, you should vote for me because I can do these great things, because I have this influence and people give money toward other organizations or causes that you care about. And anyway.
And then you could end up with an ethics complaint against you because
Right.
you solicited this donation and now you're advertising it in your campaign. So 2 years later, you're gonna get a complaint filed against you.
Yeah,
Okay,
so how do we
we're-
get protected from
We've
that?
gone past 1 o'clock, but we gavelled in a few minutes late, so, is there a motion to extend the meeting for 10 minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, great. Ms. Jones?
Mr. Chair, I had 2 other questions. All solicitations that are subject to approval or both, is that prior to or after the solicitation?
Prior to.
Prior to the solicitation.
Well, but no, you're already in communication, so it's hard to say. I mean, the GCI comes and asks purchasing whether they can, so.
Yeah, but they
I'm not
don't.
sure about the timing.
But and this goes back to Barbara's point, for us, and I think for other elected officials too, I guess it's really just even, but that's not really how it works,
Yeah,
right?
no.
You're out there beating the pavement, trying to
Exactly.
get things together in your community, trying to bring people together, and, it's just unrealistic for us to send every one of those by. I mean, one way you could avoid this is change the word public servant to municipal employee.
I'm beginning to really buy into that. I think that what you all do is so much different than just the employees getting hot dogs for.
So
type of
then the
stuff.
question
But
becomes, are
aren't
we
we-
considered municipal
Yeah, we're
employees?
paid
I
by
mean,
the
we're on the
employee.
payroll.
Or by the muni.
No, but we have that defined in the code
Okay.
itself,
Yeah.
so that is distinct.
Okay.
Well, then, it's, the important thing is trying to avoid even the appearance of a conflict,
Yeah.
because there's a certain segment out there that think we're conflicted on almost everything we do, you
Sure.
know?
But the recourse there is not, well, it might be an ethics hearing, but it's really the election, right? I mean, we have that is when the public has to decide if you're too close to a particular industry or to a particular person or a particular special interest group, right?
Right.
That's usually how we resolve it, as opposed to going to the ethics board for, should we have granted that alcohol license or not,
Mr. Gates?
I guess if we're restricting it to municipal employees, I wonder if we also would want to include members of appointed boards and commissions. That's the other category, 3 categories
Yeah.
covered by the ethics.
I have a
So
feeling that
the
doesn't come
category-
up very much, that it really, yeah.
Yeah, the
Just employees, it should be applicable to just employees, not elected officials or appointees.
I can see.
So
like-
when was the last time that someone from a board or commission
I've
had
never,
an
I've
ethics in
never
front
had
of
that.
them?
But again, I mostly have it with the employees because they come to departments.
Sort of surprised you never got one from P and Z. That seems like the
That's
one
what I
that
was
would be.
Yeah, right.
They're our most powerful
Risk.
commission.
But they're not soliciting donations
Right.
on behalf, they might be receiving gifts, the other issue.
Right.
Well, and let me
Yeah.
ask I'm sorry.
No, I
Let me
just
ask the
agree.
board or this subcommittee, because I'm more and more convinced that it should probably just be the employees. But if so, do we even need it in code, in the ethics code, or that just becomes a mayoral thing that he adds to his policy that we currently have and modify it a little bit? And just thinking out loud, it sounds to me like if it's going to be an employee thing, then you leave it to the administration and their policies, right? The PMPs, which are mayoral directives to the employees.
Ms. Kennedy?
What kind of information in terms of ethics violations or potential violations, do board members and commissioners actually receive? Because I've been on one board anyway, and I don't ever remember anybody saying, oh, you need to comply with this particular, just for that purpose of when there might be a potential conflict.
Ms. Ennis?
And I think under the old code, it was such a mess, and we had all sorts of ethics officers in the center, just very quickly sort of devolved. is that under the current board, we're trying to put together a PowerPoint, much like we gave to you. And instead of it, and under the old board, the ethics board members went around, to all these commissions, there's 40 or 80 commissions or some sort of thing, that staffer now will be responsible to make sure they look at the PowerPoint. They do that at one of their initial meetings. And we're 2 inches away from that, having that done. We are trying to get fancy and doing an interactive video, and I think we should stop trying to do that. And just get a simple PowerPoint. And then if a board, like you could have the Elmore boards, 3 or 4 of the powerful boards over there, have them have a large meeting with an ethics board group to go over conflicts of interest is where they really are interested.
Right.
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
And then when new members come on the boards, the staffers that know what they're doing, especially like the land use boards, they get their oath of office printed, and then they get their disclosure form there, which is still required, that they have to disclose when they're appointed. So those boards are doing it really well. Some of our other boards, another issue that Dee and I are working on.
Ms. Davis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So would you remove then, would the mayor still be included here? I'm just thinking all the political things we're talking about.
Well, again,
somewhat
I'm thinking we
applying to
just
him.
take this out and just have a mayoral policy that applies to the employees.
And not to the mayor himself? I'm just wondering how that employee
Well, 'cause I think
versus political, where,
I think we define him as an elected
okay, so
official.
he's not defined as an employee?
Yeah.
Okay,
He's
got
like-
it.
He's like.
Okay, that sounds good.
Now, I must say, I am not sold on this.
You guys will have to talk through it. Get
Well, I still worry about 2
philosophical
and
with the
3, right? I
example
mean,
you
it's,
did.
I still worry about, the mayor saying, hey, wouldn't it be great if you could donate to this, and this, and in the meantime, your contract's up for renewal.
Sure.
And everybody knows that, right? And I see your point. It's one thing to say, well, there's an election in 3 years, and that will determine whether I acted ethically. No, I mean, to some degree, we're protecting the public, and we're protecting these entities who are being asked to donate.
Well, and you probably would argue that the 1 through 3 is where you sort of figure that out, right? Because a lot of those wouldn't be met in the circumstances maybe we're talking about.
Oh, that's right. I
Right,
mean, that's
so
right. I
you're-
mean, like, so you might say maybe, and I could see that maybe one gets left in a certain way for elected officials because you are so often asking people to donate, and maybe that will influence the way you are going to craft policy in the future and things like that. But certainly 2 and 3, those seem to be those kind of cases. Again, that where you're actually sort of using the context coercively, right? And there it's a matter of protecting the public from, and again, whether intended or not, but potentially aggressive solicitations where it's like, okay, you have this contract up for renewal. By the way, wouldn't it be great if ... right? You built you paid for the new park, you funded this or you funded that. So I'm not 100% sold.
It's weird though. It's kind of what we've been like hired to do is like lean on wealthy corporations, and I mean obviously we're not told like yeah you're not gonna get this contract or we're gonna hold that over your head, but like we are sort of tasked with going out and trying to get people in our community to come together and make donations.
And they have.
Again.
Well, and more as Dee opened by saying, more and more is sort of like public-private partnerships. It's the future, right? With the smaller and smaller, state support. That's just the way things are going to be in the future. But so how can we unroll it in a way that still has some, protections for the public and some, and again, then the appearance that it looks like, it doesn't just look like, in this case, in the gifts, we're worried about government for sale. In this case, we're actually worried about government, being, forcing sort of, I'm not just going to accept a bribe.
Yeah.
I'm going to force the bribe.
I think the recourse there, for if you're a wealthy enough corporation or person that you're getting pushed that way, you can go to the press, and then, I mean, and then again, the election is where our accountability comes in, right? Or a recall petition, and
So we're running out of time, so it sounds like the board maybe need to work on this solicitation, item a little longer, and maybe bring it back to us next month with what changes the board decides might work out best according to the discussions we had today and the discussions you end up having at your meeting. How does that sound?
I think so. Thank you, everyone, for like some great thoughts and ideas. We hadn't thought about half of this, so this is great.
Well, I wanted a suggestion if we could have someone from this group come to that next meeting.
No, this is.
That's, he does it backwards, that's him signing up, actually.
No.
Yeah,
Nose goes.
Nose goes.
Okay, I don't get that.
Do you know this? It means
Nose
not
goes.
me.
You ever,
Not me,
everybody has
not
to
me.
touch
It's
their
a
nose.
game.
The last person to touch their nose.
Do it
is the one
quickly,
who has to
Krista.
go.
Oh, okay.
Okay, now it's Pete.
So nose goes. The last person
Got
who.
it.
Yeah.
Not me.
Yeah.
Nobody said okay.
No, the ethics board is
Trapped in
going
our
to
chair,
be
but-
inviting some person to their next meeting. That's how we'll handle that.
That sounds good.
Well, you can let us all know when it is. and-
Okay, that would be good.
Yeah.
I think that is a whole new aspect. We should
We've run out of time here right now, and I appreciate the information that you brought to us from the Ethics Board, and I guess we'll be seeing you again next month, Ms. Jones.
Mr. Chair, may I give you a quick update on your old business? I'll try and do it in less than 30 seconds.
Okay, let's do that.
Dennis Wheeler is as a contractor with RDI, is working on the service area boundaries. He has some deliverables to get to us, and then which will go to the municipal manager. The drafting committee on the election charter changes is meeting today from 4:30 to 5:30, and the Title 28 committee is working on it's working on all of Title 28, including the signature requirements on the envelopes, and it starts meeting again tomorrow at noon.
Okay,
Could I just
fantastic, Ms.
add
Cornelius.
something that's old business? It's related to the Title II draft. Is that two? Yeah, we've been doing when there's a vacancy on the assembly. We cleaned it up a little. Dean was gonna, I think, finalize, and then Barbara drafted an AM. And so soon we're working on it, but we should be able to introduce that soon.
Awesome.
Okay,
Mhm.
well, great, thank you. All right, well, let's adjourn the meeting at about, well, wait a minute, we gotta have public participation. There's participation.
You got a newcomer, so did I.
You need to do the motion to extend.
All right, well, let's have a motion to extend for 3 minutes.
Move to extend for 3 minutes.
Second.
Okay, we're extending. Go ahead.
I have a meeting at 1:15, so I have to go start.
The correct time is 1:10. So when you did that, 1:13, you can't be using that 1 o'clock. Okay, that's way off. The correct time is 1:10. The clock saying 1:14. My name is Eugene Colhaven, to represent myself, all the public process. The public process is done appropriately, it's made by the governing body. It's more like a public interest. I'm going to be very, very brief. All I'm going to say is I arrived at 12:06 for the record, so I missed a couple of minutes of the meeting. So we got to listen to the tape. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
All right, we're adjourned.